It was one of those crisp spring evenings in Asheville, North Carolina, where the sun clung just a little longer to the mountaintops, and the breeze carried the scent of fresh earth and blooming wisteria. A small food truck hummed quietly at the edge of a local park, its tiny lights flickering on as the day faded. Inside, Sophia Lane, a 26-year-old aspiring chef with stubborn dreams and an even more stubborn debt, stirred a pot of her grandmother's stew recipe, the one dish she believed could change everything. Sophia had been cooking out of this beat-up food truck for 2 years. It had no air conditioning, the stove was temperamental, and the tires were practically held together with hope. But this truck was all she had after leaving culinary school halfway through, unable to afford tuition. Still, people came, not because she had fancy sauces or television fame, but because every bite she served came with something extra heart. That night, as she handed a bowl of her grandmother's stew to a regular, an older man sat alone at a nearby bench, watching the exchange. He wore an old tweed jacket, a felt hat too warm for the weather, and the kind of watch that looked like it had once belonged to someone very powerful. He didn't order anything, just watched. Sophia noticed him as she cleaned the counter. Something about his eyes, gray, heavy, and deeply tired, made her pause. She walked out from the truck and offered him a small cup of stew, free of charge. "You've been sitting there all evening," she said, gently. "This is on me." He took it without a word, then tasted it slowly. Something shifted in his face, his brows pulled together, his lips trembled slightly. He didn't say thank you, but he finished every drop. The next day, he came again, and again, each time, silent, always ordering the same thing, her grandmother's stew. On the 5th day, he finally spoke. "I want you to cook me dinner," he said, placing a heavy black envelope on the counter. Sophia blinked. "Excuse me, one dinner," he repeated. "A private one, in my home, no one else. Just you, me, and that recipe. I'll pay you anything." Sophia hesitated. "Sir, I don't usually do private events. If you make this dinner," he said quietly, "I'll give you my inheritance." She laughed softly. "You mean like a tip?" He didn't smile. "I'm not joking. I'm a very wealthy man, but I have no family, no one left. I've eaten in every 5-star restaurant from Tokyo to Paris, but nothing's ever tasted like that stew. That stew. It reminded me of something I hadn't felt in decades." "Sir, I really don't think I'm dying," he interrupted. The words hit her like a slap of cold air. "I'm not trying to make your life more complicated," he said, "but I'm offering something real. Come to my house tomorrow night. Make the stew. If you do, I'll sign everything over to you, my estate, my land, everything. No catch, just one dinner." Sophia stared at him, unsure whether to be terrified, flattered, or suspicious. "Why me?" He looked her dead in the eye. "Because something in your cooking carries love. That's rarer than money." She opened the envelope after he left. Inside was a handwritten letter of intent, a formal dinner invitation, and a copy of a last will and testament. Her name was already printed under beneficiary. She didn't sleep that night. What if this was real? What if it was a scam? Who was this man? The next evening, she followed the directions to the address listed on the invitation. The house was nestled behind iron gates in a part of town. She never dared to drive through too many zeros in the real estate listings. The mansion was huge, ivy-covered, and quiet. She parked her truck nervously and carried her stew pot up the front steps, heart racing. As she knocked, a strange feeling settled over her, like she was about to step into something far bigger than a private dinner. The door opened. The man stood there, dressed in a velvet robe this time, but his face had changed, paler, weaker. "You came," he said, almost in relief. "Come in." As she stepped inside, the air shifted. The lights were low, classical music played faintly, and photos lined the hallway walls. But what she saw in those frames made her freeze. There, in one of the pictures, young, smiling, holding a child, was her grandmother. Her knees buckled slightly. That's not possible," she whispered. He turned to look at her, his voice trembling now. "You have more of her in you than just her recipes." And at that moment, the pot in her arms suddenly felt like the key to a locked room inside a long-forgotten story. The real dinner hadn't even started yet, but something inside her told her this night would change her life forever, and she had no idea just how right she was. *. The door shut behind her with a quiet thud. sealing Sophia inside the kind of home she had only ever seen in magazines. The air smelled faintly of sandalwood and old paper, the kind of scent you associate with memories. The man, still nameless, led her through the foyer with its high ceilings and stained glass, down a hall lined with heavy portraits and locked doors. But it was the photo she had just seen her grandmother smiling, younger than Sophia had ever known, her that played on repeat in her mind. "Wait," she said, pausing in the hallway. "That picture back there, that was my grandmother. Evelyn Lane." He stopped. "Yes, Evelyn." Sophia's voice faltered. "How do you know her?" The man turned slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Evelyn Lane was the only woman who ever truly saved me." Sophia blinked. "Saved you how?" He didn't answer. Instead, he motioned to a dining room off the main hall. The space was breathtaking. A long mahogany table sat beneath a chandelier of blown glass, its surface empty but for a single plate, a cloth napkin, and a silver spoon placed carefully at the center. "I won't eat much," he said softly, "but I need to taste it again. One more time." Still trying to quiet the whirlwind in her mind, Sophia moved to the small kitchen adjacent to the dining room. It was spotless, cold, clearly unused in years, but it had everything she needed. She began chopping, sautéing, stirring. Her hands moved automatically, guided by muscle memory and her grandmother's teachings. The stew began to take form, browning perfectly, garlic blooming in hot oil, the scent of rosemary and bay filling the room like a memory made real. As it simmered, she looked around the kitchen, her eyes catching on a faded recipe card pinned under a magnet on the fridge. Her breath hitched out. It was her grandmother's handwriting. She pulled it down, her fingers trembling. It was the exact same stew recipe she had memorized years ago. Leave this one had notes scribbled on the margins. 4D, one-line read, add more time. He likes it that way. She turned, storming back into the dining room. "What is this? Who are you? Why do you have this?" The man sat at the head of the table now, his eyes glistening, though he hadn't touched the spoon. "I told you," he said. "Your grandmother saved me. I was 17, angry, lost. I was living on the streets after my mother passed, and my father disowned me. Evelyn found me sleeping behind her diner one night. She didn't ask questions. She didn't call the police. She brought me inside and made me soup." Sophia's heart pounded as he continued. "For 3 years, she fed me, gave me work, taught me how to show up, how to live with dignity. I was nothing, but she treated me like someone who mattered. Then one day, I disappeared. I got a job offer in Boston, and I left without saying goodbye. I wrote letters, but I never sent them. I thought I'd come back and thank her when I had something to give." He paused, "But I never did. And when I finally returned to Charleston, the diner was gone. No one knew where she'd gone. I spent years trying to find her. I hired private investigators, but it was like she had vanished." Sophia's throat was dry. "She moved here, with me, after my parents died. She never talked about Charleston, or a boy she helped. She just cooked." He nodded, almost smiling. "Sounds like her. But why me? Why your inheritance?" He looked at her then not like a stranger, but like someone who'd found something lost for a long, long time. "Because you're the closest thing to family I ever had. You carry her heart in your hands every time you stir a pot, and I have no one else. No one who understands the power of what that woman gave, what you give now." He picked up the spoon and took the first bite. He closed his eyes, and for a long moment, said nothing. Then, in a voice that broke gently with emotion, he whispered, "That's it. That's her, right here." Sophia lowered herself into the chair across from him, her mind spiraling. This was more than a meal. This was a resurrection, a bridge between two souls who had loved the same woman in different lifetimes. And then he added, almost casually, "I have something else to show you, upstairs, when you're ready." The way he said it chilled her, as if the stew wasn't the end of the story, but only the beginning. She stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm ready." As he led her up the staircase, she could feel the air thickening. The house seemed to whisper as they climbed. Every step felt like a question she didn't yet know how to answer. At the end of the hallway, he opened a door. Inside was a study walls lined with books, letters, photographs, but in the center of the room was a single locked trunk. He knelt beside it, fumbled with a key, and opened it slowly. Sophia gasped. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to Evelyn Lane, all unsent. each one dated, each one filled with a different year of his life. I wrote to her every birthday, he said, every Christmas, every time I had a win or a failure. I just didn't know where to send them. I kept them all, hoping maybe one day. His voice cracked. She reached into the box and picked one up, then another. And then, at the bottom of the trunk, she found something else, a black and white photograph of a woman holding a newborn. On the back, in careful handwriting, Evelyn with Sophia, May 3rd. The world tipped sideways. He looked at her slowly. I didn't just know her, Sophia, I loved her. She never told you, but she raised you like her own, because you were her own. She adopted you after your parents died, but you were mine. Sophia dropped the photo. Her knees buckled again, but this time she didn't fall. Sophia stood frozen, her fingers still touching the photograph, as though it might vanish if she let go. Her ears rang. The room, the letters, the trunk, it all blurred into a strange kind of silence. The kind that happens not when the world goes quiet, but when everything inside you stops at once. The man, this stranger who'd been sitting at her food truck just days earlier, watched her closely, his face lined with both sorrow and hesitation. He had dropped a truth on her so heavy, so unexpected, it didn't feel real. You're lying, she said finally, voice cracking. That's not possible. He didn't flinch. I wish I were. She took a step back, shaking her head. You don't get to come into my life, feed me some fantasy about a stew, and then tell me you're my... She couldn't say the word. That your father, he said quietly, almost reverently. Yes, no, she whispered, looking back down at the photo. My parents died when I was 4. I was told they were killed in a car crash. I was told they were... gone. He nodded. They were. Your mother Emily was my wife. We married young. Too young. I was angry back then, chasing dreams, working night shifts, trying to make something of myself. I was barely around, and she needed more than I could give. Sophia's hands began to tremble, but she didn't interrupt. She left me. Sophia took you with her, went back to her hometown. I didn't fight her. I thought I was doing you both a favor. But a year later, the accident happened, and Evelyn, your grandmother, stepped in. Sophia's voice shook. Why didn't she tell me? Maybe she wanted to protect you. Maybe she thought I didn't deserve you. And honestly, maybe she was right. I wasn't a man back then. I was a boy pretending to be one. Sophia sank into the nearest chair. Her whole life had been built on a story that now seemed like a partial truth. Not a lie, but not the whole picture either. She had grown up thinking her grandmother took her in out of kindness. But now, the thought that Evelyn had done it out of love for her own son and as a way to preserve his child's future made the memories heavier, deeper. The man walked over slowly, knelt in front of her, and gently handed her another letter from the trunk. This one, he said, was written the day after your 3rd birthday. I had just gotten a job in California. I had plans to come back for you, to fix everything. She took it, but didn't open it. I'm not asking you to believe everything tonight, he said softly, but you deserve the truth, all of it. Sophia blinked back a sudden wave of emotion. What's your name? He hesitated. Daniel. The name felt strange and familiar at once, like a word from a dream she couldn't quite remember. She stared at the photo again, the one of Evelyn cradling her as a baby, and something inside her cracked open. She could almost hear Evelyn's voice in her head. Some things are better revealed when the heart is ready. Why now? She asked. Daniel looked away. Because I'm sick, and I don't have much time. I spent years chasing success and building walls to keep the past out, but the past never leaves, it just waits. Sophia sat in silence for a long while. The stew on the stove below had probably gone cold by now, but that didn't matter. Her mind was spiraling through memories, questions, faces she hadn't thought of in years. Why the inheritance? She asked quietly. Why give it all to me? Because it's not the money that matters, Daniel replied. It's what I never gave you: opportunity, support, a future. I failed you once, Sophia. I'm trying not to fail you again. He rose and walked to the window, his back turned. Everything I have means nothing if I die without knowing I tried to make things right. Downstairs, her grandfather clock chimed 8 times. Sophia finally stood. She walked back to the trunk and gently ran her hand over the old letters. The corners frayed. The ink faded. This wasn't some fantasy. These were real. These were written by a man who had once been lost, and maybe still was. Can I stay the night? She asked. surprising herself. Daniel turned slowly. Of course, they didn't speak much after that. Sophia went to the guest room at the end of the hall. It was warm, filled with soft lamplight and simple furniture. A quilt rested on the bed, hand-stitched, with initials sewn into the corner, E.L. She held the edge of the fabric for a long time. Later that night, as the house fell quiet, Sophia walked barefoot down to the kitchen. She reheated the stew and poured 2 bowls, one for her, one for Daniel. They ate together in silence at the long table, not because there was nothing to say, but because some connections are stronger than words. Before going back upstairs, Daniel reached into a drawer and handed her a small key. "It's for the safe in the study," he said. "When I'm gone, use it." She stared at the key. "And if I don't want the money, then take the stories, the recipes, the photos, and build your own version of us." That night, Sophia lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind filled with questions she never knew to ask before. The kind of questions that weren't just about identity, but about legacy. What if her purpose was never just to cook for survival? What if her purpose was to carry forward something that began before she even knew it existed? And just before sleep took her, she whispered into the darkness, maybe this stew was more than a meal. Maybe it was a memory waiting to find its way home. Sophia awoke before the sun. The sky outside the guest room window was still the deep violet of pre-dawn, painted with hints of silver clouds drifting slowly across the horizon. The house was utterly silent, but she could feel it breathing. Every creak of the old floors, every whisper of wind through the ivy-covered shutters seemed to carry a presence, as if Evelyn herself was still somewhere within those walls, watching, guiding. She pulled on a worn cardigan left draped over the chair, one that smelled faintly of lavender and wood smoke, and padded barefoot down the hallway. The study door was still ajar, the trunk of letters left open as she'd last seen it. But now her eyes were drawn to something else, the portrait, hanging just above the fireplace. It was Evelyn, years younger than Sophia had ever seen her, holding an infant, standing beside a man whose face Sophia now knew as Daniel's. Her parents, all 3 of them, frozen in a moment she had no memory of, but now ached to understand. She stepped closer. Beneath the painting was a brass plate etched with a single line, "Love doesn't need to be explained, it just needs to be remembered." A rustling sound behind her made her turn. Daniel stood in the hallway, leaning slightly on the doorframe. He looked older this morning, worn, pale, like the weight of yesterday had carved something new into his expression. He gave her a tired smile. "Didn't think you'd be up this early. I couldn't sleep," she said. "Too many ghosts in this house." He chuckled softly. "Yeah, it's full of them, isn't it?" They stood in silence for a while, both staring at the portrait. Finally, Daniel stepped into the room and picked up a small envelope from the desk. "I was going to wait until later, but something tells me you're ready now." He handed it to her. On the front, in Evelyn's unmistakable cursive, were 3 words, "For my Sophia," with shaking hands. Sophia opened it. Inside was a single-page letter, yellowed with time but carefully preserved. "My dearest girl, if you are reading this, then the time has come for truth to walk in daylight. I never kept secrets out of shame but out of love. Sometimes the past is too sharp to handle all at once. It needs time to soften, to settle, to become something we can carry. You were never just my granddaughter. You were my second chance, a chance to hold love again after losing so much. Your father Daniel was a boy when he became a man too soon. Life tested him, and in doing so, it nearly broke him. But inside him was always the light I knew he had. And now, that light lives in you. You have always cooked with your heart. It's your gift. Just as I once used recipes to stitch together the broken people who found themselves at my table, so too will you. Please forgive me for not telling you sooner. And when the time comes, tell the world who you are. Not by name, but by the way you make them feel when they taste your food. Because in that moment, you're giving them something no one else can. A piece of your soul. A piece of us. Love always." Evelyn. Sophia pressed the letter to her chest. She couldn't stop the tears this time, nor did she want to. They weren't tears of grief anymore. They were the slow release of something sacred, something long buried, finally surfacing. Daniel was watching her carefully. "She wrote that for you before she passed. Said it was the only thing that mattered more than the inheritance." "I think she was right," Sophia whispered. He nodded. "I've seen a lot of people chase wealth. I chased it too. But your grandmother, she built a life on something richer, Sophia folded the letter gently, tucking it back into its envelope. Then, with a newfound steadiness in her voice, she said, "I want to see the safe." Daniel looked surprised for a moment, then smiled. He moved toward the bookshelf in the corner and pulled a hidden lever beneath a dusty novel. With a soft click, the back panel slid open, revealing a small steel safe embedded in the wall. She inserted the key he'd given her. Inside were three things: a handwritten recipe book different from the one she already had bound in worn red leather, a sealed envelope labeled Legal Transfer, Whitmore Estate, and a small velvet pouch. Sophia reached for the pouch first. Inside was a delicate gold pendant on a chain. Etched into the back were initials, E.L. and D.W., Evelyn and Daniel Whitmore. It hit her then, not just who she was, but what she came from. A lineage, not of royalty or wealth, but of resilience, of second chances, of people who chose healing over hatred, hope over hurt. The red leather recipe book was filled with more than food instructions. Each page had a memory, a name, a note scribbled in the margin. People Evelyn had fed, stories of how a simple bowl of stew saved a runaway, or how lemon cake helped a widow smile again after burying her husband. She wasn't just cooking, Sophia said aloud, she was mending people. Daniel nodded slowly. Exactly. That day, they spent hours reading through the book together, laughing, crying, telling stories. Daniel told her about Evelyn's old diner, the way she refused to turn anyone away, even if they couldn't pay, how she kept a jar labeled "Pay When You Can," and how that jar funded dozens of meals during hard times. By evening, Sophia had made a decision. "I want to reopen her diner," she said. "Not the old building, but something new. Something with her name, a place where people find more than food, a place they find family even if they didn't know they had one." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "She would have loved that. She's going to love that," Sophia corrected. "Because I'm going to do it her way, the way she taught me, the way you helped me rediscover." And then, she reached across the table, took his hand, and held it firmly. "But I'm not doing it alone." He squeezed her fingers gently. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees, whispering like an old soul. Somewhere in the heart of that house, the spirit of Evelyn Lane smiled. The rain began the morning Sophia signed the lease for the old brick building at the corner of Maple and Carson. Soft, steady drops that seemed to bless the sidewalk as she stepped through the doorway. The space had once been a florist's shop, then a bakery, and most recently a thrift store, long since shuttered. The windows were dusty, the floorboards uneven, and the kitchen in desperate need of repair. But Sophia didn't see the damage. She saw warmth. She saw a dining counter full of laughter, and a wall covered in Polaroids of regulars who'd once felt like strangers. Daniel followed behind her, his coat draped over one arm, coughing quietly into his sleeve. The illness was taking its toll more visibly now, his steps slower, his skin a little grayer, but his spirit, that hadn't dimmed. In fact, seeing Sophia move with such purpose seemed to strengthen him. He watched her walk through the space, measuring walls with her arms, mapping out where the oven would go, where Evelyn's picture would hang. "This place has good bones," he said, voice raspy, but proud. "Better than good," she replied. "It has room to grow." They spent the next few weeks pouring every ounce of energy into the renovation. Sophia used the money Daniel gave her along with a grant Evelyn had secretly set up years ago for women with big hearts and empty pockets, to hire local workers and buy second-hand equipment. She painted the walls herself, choosing a warm cream with hints of rose gold. Every table was reclaimed wood, sanded and stained by her own hands. Above the entrance, in gently curved metal script, they mounted a sign, "Evelyn's Table." But it wasn't just a restaurant. It was a promise. On the day of the soft opening, the air buzzed with more than nerves. Sophia had invited the whole neighborhood, everyone who remembered Evelyn, everyone who had eaten her cooking, or simply needed a place to sit and breathe. By 4 p.m., the line stretched down the block. Inside, Sophia stood behind the counter in a white apron stained with broth and spice, her hair tied back, cheeks flushed with nervous joy. In the corner, Daniel sat at a table with a thermos of tea and a folded handkerchief. He wasn't strong enough to help in the kitchen, but he was there watching her, the way a proud father watches his child take their first steps all over again. The bell over the door chimed. The first guest, an elderly man with kind eyes and a slight limp, stepped in holding a photo. She gave me stew after my wife died, he said, placing the picture gently on the counter. Didn't charge me a dime, just said, let love feed you first. I never forgot that. Sophia smiled, tears gathering behind her eyes. Then we'll start with stew. As the night wore on, the restaurant became more than busy, it became alive. Sophia moved between tables like a quiet storm, delivering plates, hugging old friends, listening to stories that echoed Evelyn's kindness. At one point, a woman in her 30s stood from her table and tapped her glass. I need to say something, she said. I came here tonight because I read about this place online. I didn't know Evelyn, but I lost my job 2 months ago, and I've been struggling. When I saw this flyer about food for the heart, I thought maybe, just maybe, someone still cared. And now, I know someone does. She sat down, eyes glassy. The entire room broke into applause. Later, after the crowd had dwindled and the lights dimmed low, Sophia sat across from Daniel. He was tired, she could see it, but there was a peacefulness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. You did it, he whispered. No, she said, taking his hand. We did. He smiled weakly. Your grandmother would be so proud. Sophia swallowed hard. She was always proud. I just didn't know it then. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. There's one last thing. I wasn't sure if I should give this to you. Evelyn left it with me years ago. Told me to hold on to it until I was certain you didn't just carry her recipes, but her courage. Inside was a single recipe card. At the top, it read, Courage Stew. Below that, no ingredients, no instructions, just a line in Evelyn's handwriting. You already know how to make it. Just remember who you're making it for. Sophia stared at the card for a long time. Then, without a word, she walked into the kitchen and pinned it to the wall above the stove. Later that night, when Daniel had gone to bed and the last light had been turned off, Sophia stood outside the restaurant beneath the glow of the street lamp. The rain had returned, gentle and cool. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. In her heart, she heard Evelyn's voice, not loud, not distant, but steady. Love feeds the soul. You've fed mine, now feed theirs. And for the first time in her life, Sophia felt not like a girl chasing a dream, but a woman living one. The last Sunday in October arrived, wrapped in golden light. The trees outside Evelyn's table blazed with amber and crimson, their leaves fluttering gently to the sidewalk like whispers from the past. Inside, the scent of roasted garlic and rosemary drifted through the air as Sophia stirred a large pot on the stove. The same stove Evelyn had used decades ago, now restored, polished and glowing. It had been 6 months since the opening. 6 months of laughter, tears, recipes scribbled on napkins, and stories exchanged over shared meals. The little restaurant had become a beacon, not just for the hungry, but for the lonely, the grieving, the lost. And today, something felt different. The kind of different you can't see, but you feel in your chest, like the final note of a song you didn't know was ending. Daniel hadn't come in that morning. He never missed Sundays. It was their day. He'd sit by the window with a mug of mint tea and read the paper aloud in a terrible British accent, while Sophia prepped for the brunch rush. It was a tradition, quiet and sacred. But today, his chair was empty. Sophia had called twice. No answer. She tried not to panic, tried to remind herself that maybe he was just sleeping in. But as noon approached, she couldn't ignore the tightness building in her throat. Her hands trembled as she passed off the kitchen to Marco, her sous chef, and pulled off her apron. I'll be back soon, she said, her voice thinner than she intended. When she reached Daniel's house, the sunlight was soft against the shutters. Nothing looked out of place. But as she stepped inside, the silence was deafening. Not eerie, not cold, just still. Like everything had paused out of respect. He was in his armchair, a worn book open in his lap, his eyes closed, peaceful. Sophia knelt beside him, her hand resting gently on his. A note was tucked beneath his fingers, addressed to her. She didn't cry, not yet. Some part of her knew this day would come, and she also knew it wasn't the end. It was the continuation of a legacy passed, like a torch, lit by Evelyn, carried by Daniel, and now firmly in her hands. Back at the restaurant that evening, Sophia stood before the staff, guests, and neighborhood friends gathered around candlelit tables. She held the letter in both hands and read it aloud. Dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, then I've made my peace. I lived a second life because of you, a better life. I had a front row seat to watch someone turn sorrow into purpose, fear into fire, and recipes into resurrection. You took a broken family tree and planted new roots. You fed strangers and made them kin. And more than anything, you reminded me what it means to truly live. This isn't goodbye, not really. Every dish you serve will carry my voice. Every story you share will echo Evelyn's heart. And one day, when you pass the torch, someone will say the same about you. Love without end, Dad. Sophia folded the letter slowly, holding it close to her chest as the room fell into a reverent silence. Then she smiled, small but full. He asked for one thing, she said softly, a final dinner. Not for him, but for all of you. His thank you meal. And so, they cooked, not in silence, but in harmony. The staff moved like dancers in a familiar rhythm. Sophia brought out trays of Evelyn's classics: chicken pie with time-laced crust, sweet potato soufflé with toasted pecans, cornbread so soft it felt like memory. People stayed late. No one wanted to leave. Before the night ended, Sophia pinned her father's letter beside Evelyn's recipe card. Above them both, she hung a new frame photograph of the three of them, Evelyn, Daniel, and baby Sophia, in a sling, laughing beneath a cherry blossom tree. The next morning, she rose before the sun. She unlocked the restaurant, turned on the lights, and stood behind the counter with her hands pressed to the wood. For a long time, she didn't move. She just listened to the hum of the fridge, the creak of the door, the quiet heartbeat of the space around her. And in that stillness, a memory stirred. Evelyn's voice, warm as soup and sharp as truth. Love doesn't die, child. It just changes seats at the table. Sophia smiled, and with that, she reached for her apron, tied it tight around her waist, and opened the doors, not just to serve food, but to serve the legacy of love that built everything she knew.